St. Mary's. Today's reading comes from Revelation 22, verse 1 to 5, and it says this: Then the angel showed me the river of water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood a tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are of the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more light. There will be no need to light a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. I'm sure that we are all familiar with how the Bible begins. Anyone who has any attempts to read the Bible from front to back under their belt, regardless of how successful those attempts have ended up being, will be familiar with how the Bible begins. The story of creation, the story of the garden, the story of humanity, the story of the snake. That's the story that so many of us are familiar with. It's the story that I'm sure many of us have been tasked with colouring in at some point in our lives. But in comparison, we're altogether less familiar with the story that comes at the end of the Bible. Today's reading is the beginning of the very last chapter of the Bible. It describes the last image of humanity and God, the image of eternity. Because of this, you can characterize it as a kind of matching pair with the Genesis story. One describes the beginning, the other describes the end. Both describe Eden. Both describe rivers flowing, and both describe God's presence with humanity. However, these stories might be a matching pair, but they aren't an identical pair. There are particular details in the Revelation passage that catch my eye. And the detail that stands out most to me is this. Where Genesis describes a garden, Revelation describes a city. The garden paradise is reborn as a city. What's more human than a city? Cities are uniquely human environments. God inhabiting a city speaks to me of God's desire to work with humanity, not to destroy or disregard human culture and the beauty that's contained within it, but rather to redeem it. Cities are the product of human culture which at this particular moment is in a bondage to decay along with the rest of creation, as it's warped and distorted by the rebellion that exists within it. But this will one day no longer be the case. The promise of this second Eden is the promise of Christ's redeeming presence amongst us. Promised that redeeming presence will not only redeem us from sin's consequence, but also sin's distortion. Things of beauty will no longer have their places of shadow, because the goodness and presence of God will permeate all things. This picture in Revelation is the final picture we get in the Bible of God and humanity. It's where the story that starts in Genesis ends. As we continue our journey through Advent, a journey that culminates in a baby lying in a manger, let's remember the whole story of creation has already embarked on a greater journey of Advent, one which culminates not in a stable, but in a city where God dwells with his people, and where all things have been made new, because the old order of things